G'day friends, Riley again here from Opal Auction Shop 53 Frogs. I've been loading a lot of grade 4 material, that's opal material that's 1 to 2 millimeters thick over the last few weeks, and as a result have gotten a lot of questions about cutting opal doublets. If you're not an opal miner and don't have unlimited opal income, it's really important to learn how to cut opal doublets in order to maximize the value of every parcel. Opal doublets are fun to cut, they're easy to cut, and you really increase the value that you get for every parcel by honing in on this particular skill and getting good at it. In order to cut opal doublets, you just need a few things. One is Epoxy 330. I've had a lot of you guys talk to me about other things that you've tried and are trying, JB Weld and that kind of thing. The reason that we use a good lapidary epoxy like Epoxy 330 is that it has the unique ability to both bond really strongly and take a polish, so that whenever you're polishing your opal up, after you've got it adhered to your opal backing, the Epoxy 330 that runs between the slice and opal backing will take almost the exact same polish as the opal does, and it makes the transition between those two materials look really nice. Second thing is some kind of backing material. I have black glass that's been textured on all sides so that it accepts the epoxy really easily and bonds well. I've got it in the shop in my lapidary section under doublet black glass. The epoxy is under lapidary epoxy in this section. The other thing that is a nice to have, not necessarily have to have, is black oxide. We mix just a little bit of black oxide up with the 330 in order to make it a nice consistent black color. It just makes the opal slice pop a little bit harder. The last thing that you need is your opal. If you're looking for opal in my shop, it's the grade 4 material, or if you have your own thin opal, 1 to 2 millimeters is kind of the sweet spot for making opal doublets. All right, I'm starting out here on my high-tech flat lap 8-inch with a 260 grit lap. It's a pretty good place to start for these kinds of things. We'll get it going. Generally, I'll start around the outside just to clean up the edges. Once the edges are clean, you put the face down and make sure both sides are perfectly flat. The next step here is to make sure that they're absolutely dry before proceeding. I highly suggest getting some latex gloves. You don't get this epoxy stuff on your hands. It's really hard to get off. The black oxide also is very hard to get off, so a whole bunch of stuff that you don't really want to have on your hands. Make sure that we have enough glass to do the job. Okay, so you get 3 here. Okay, just make sure that you have a clear shot so that you can get your saw all the way through. I have an issue with this opal that there's a sand spot, right? But if you turn it and look at it on the profile, you can see that the sand is only on the top and there's no sand on the bottom. And so I'm going to put the glue on this side, slap it down this way, and then I'm going to cut the sand off whenever I'm cutting the opal. It will go like this. It's really important that you make sure that the clearest, brightest part is closest to the black backing, because you can grind down to that part, and often that's whenever you get the best doublets. So it's important to make sure that they're faced in the right direction. Now for the 330, I've got a whole dop stick. Note about this 330, it almost always comes messed up from the factory. There's always some kind of leaking or stuff going. I've been using this stuff for 20 years, and that's just the way this stuff comes. So not something to be worried about. That's just what happens with this stuff. You turn it around, poke the film. Doesn't take a lot. Almost a dime, a bit more than a pea. That's the hardener, and this is the resin. You want equal parts resin and hardener. This is the black oxide. For this amount, I'll just drop it in there, and something like that. Okay. So this gets mixed up really well together. Making sure to get all the resin and all the hardener all pulled into the center. So you probably have a good 5 minutes to work with this. Okay, so making sure to keep the orientation the same.
Alright, here's a really important tip. A lot of times people will get bubbles in between the slice and the host material, and you can see those bubbles really clearly in the final product. So once you put the opal down on the epoxy, make sure to push it down evenly and to push it back and forth and wiggle it around a bit so that there are no air bubbles in there. Look really carefully and you can sometimes see them getting pushed out.
Alright, so that's it for now. Generally at this point I like to let them sit overnight. You could probably get away with 4 or 5 hours, especially if you put them out in the sunshine and let them cure that way. But I just let them sit overnight, find something else to do for now. And then we'll come back tomorrow and finish off cutting them free, so each and every piece, putting a template on them, making sure that we like the shape, and then finishing the cut on them. Number one, make sure your epoxy is mixed really well and it's in equal parts. A lot of guys say their doublets don't set up, and it's because they use quite a bit more resin or quite a bit more hardener. It is a bit picky, this stuff, and if you use too much of one, not enough of the other. If you get too far away from 50-50, then the stuff doesn't set up properly. Number two, don't use too much black oxide. I've seen people have adhesion problems that use too much of the black oxide. It just takes a little bit. Three, whenever you put the slices down, make sure you move them around a little bit. A lot of people have problems getting bubbles in between the slices, and that's just because they whack them down. If I'm using big slices, like if I've cut really big doublets, I'll actually apply the epoxy to the glass, and then I'll apply the epoxy with the stick to the back of the slice, and then I'll sandwich them together. And that's one way you can keep, if you have problems getting bubbles in your opal, that's one way that you can keep the air bubbles out, because I don't know, something about if you put them together and there's epoxy on both sides and you just kind of sandwich them slowly at an angle, it squeezes all of the air out. And the last thing for this part is just to make sure that in the sandwich you have the backing. Make sure that the brightest, clearest part of the opal is the part that's set right next to the backing material. Don't put it on the top with substandard sandy opal and then the backing material, because it just doesn't look as good that way. You'll see that material reflected up through the clear top. It's better to put the clear top next to the backing and then grind through that sandy part, so that all you have is the very thin layer of the clear top and it's sitting right on top of that backing. One of the great misconceptions and the hang-up points is when people get this material and they look at it and they're used to cutting solids, is that the material looks really thin and they think, oh, well, I couldn't possibly cut a doublet out of this material. Couldn't possibly cut it that thin. To give you a frame of reference, if I'm into some really advanced doublet cutting, the thickness of that slice can be 0.3 millimeters. So I can get 3 of those slices into 1 millimeter. That's how thin it can get and still turn out to be fantastic looking doublets. So it's a bit of a leap of faith if you're not used to cutting doublets. Just trust me, as long as there's, say, 0.3 millimeters of usable clear material, and you put that material, right up next to your doublet backing, you can still cut an amazing doublet out of it. It's just a trial and error thing. You just have to do a bunch of it to get a feel for exactly what you can get away with. And a lot of times, the thinner that slice, the nicer the doublet turns out to be in terms of the color and the clarity that pops through.
The next step is just to trim around the glass up until the point where the opal starts.
So you can see if it goes in like that, you need to cut it in a bit more. As you go in, it'll clean it up. So you need to be able to see your bar all the way around. So you need to go a little bit more in here. Clean all the way around.
Next, you get a template and a sharp mechanical pencil and mark your cut on the face of the opal. Now it's time to dop the opals. The 330 doesn't like being heated up, so dopping them with traditional wax can be really tricky business because you have to be very careful not to melt the 330. This is when using something like my optical dopping kit is really nice, or using super glue or something like that, because you don't have to worry about melting the 330. Here I'm setting the optical glue with a little UV light. I do my preliminary shaping here on the 600 grit wheel. It's just a little bit slower. I am a high-tech affiliate, so if you like one of these 8-inch machines, I'll give you a link down below along with my affiliate code 53frogs, which will get you 10% off any non-machine items when purchasing from the high-tech website. It's a great way to help support the channel and the educational content that I try to put together for you guys. There we go, final stones. Everybody, thanks for watching, and as always, if you have any questions, just drop me a message, and I'm always happy to help. Thanks, bye-bye.